Well, good morning again, Heather.
Good morning, Allan.
How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Holding
Good.
up.
Good. So we're off for part two, and I promise everybody, including myself, that this time we will definitely cover sea squirts. Deal?
Yes, we will.
So to start off with, though, I believe, because you told me at the end of the last video that you'd found something that you might want to share on the beach a few weeks ago. So do you want to just show that now? But let's not tell anybody what it is. And then what we'll do is we'll come back to it at the end of the video.
Okay, this is something I found a little while ago, and hold it there for you to have a little look.
Right.
This had me massively excited. It is the first one of these that I have ever found, and my son, who was with me, was massively excited too.
Excellent. Excellent. Right. Well, what we'll do is we'll come back and talk about that at the end of the video. It looks really exciting. I already know what it is because you told me, so I can't even cheat and say, oh yes, it's one of them, because you know you've told me. Right. Okay. So a couple of things I want to talk to you about. Sea squirts, an obvious one, but the first thing I want to just touch on is seagrass.
Yes.
The reason I want to talk about seagrass is because, again, it's not got a chapter in your book, but you do make reference to it quite a bit, and we did talk about it a little bit in the last video, but I want to just broaden on it because, you know, everybody knows sort of, you know, grasslands, important habitat, and woodlands and rainforests and all of that lot. What I don't think people could quite appreciate is the fact that seagrass is a really, really important habitat, and there's some of it around our coasts. So could you give us an idea of sort of what seagrass is, first of all, and also the types of sort of creatures that would actually rely on it, and maybe touch on some of the problems that it faces?
Sure. Yeah, seagrass is fascinating, really, because it is the only flowering plant in the ocean. The oceans obviously have a lot of plants in them at shallow levels where they get enough light to photosynthesize, and they're all seaweeds. You know, we all know seaweeds, see them on the beach, slippery things. They'd be green, red, brown. But the seagrass is a flowering plant, and it is very much like a grass on the land, right down to the fact that its flowers are not particularly impressive. You can barely see the flowers. You know, if you've got a good hand lens, you can just about see them, but they're just little strands, a bit like grass flowers are on the land. But what's very special about seagrass is the way its root system, if you like, grows. It doesn't have roots in the way that land plants have roots. It has these things called rhizostomes that spread out in the sediment under the sea floor, and the seagrass grows off those, and it can grow quite slowly, but can live for an exceptionally long time. And I've seen people suggesting that some seagrass beds are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old because of the way they keep regenerating from the same rhizostome network, which is completely bizarre. And seagrass is particularly important because in those shallow seas where they grow, they will stabilize the sediment through that root system, and that can be a real help in breaking wave action coming into the shore, in preventing sediment being eroded, and therefore in protecting the land as well from flooding, which is obviously of particular interest as climate change comes along.
If I could just add, because obviously you walk into the sea and you've got sand under your feet and beneath, you know, between your toes, and you're walking. Where does seagrass actually grow then? So, because I mean, the sediment in the sea that you're walking into is really soft under your feet. So, whereabouts does it grow, and what does the, if you like, you know, what does the seabed need to have to be made up of in order for this seagrass to actually get that hold?
Yeah, I think seagrass, like any other animal or plant, needs nutrients. It likes sand that has a fair amount of sediment. So places that you find a lot of seagrass is places like, you know, around Portsmouth, those big, shallow, estuarine, muddy sediment sort of habitats. but they're found in quite a few places around our coast, and because they occur underwater, very few seagrass beds are accessible on the surface, even at the very lowest tides. Some are, but mostly they grow up to about 10 meters of depth of water, and unless people are diving and looking there, you wouldn't know that there's a seagrass bed there. The way that I will normally know there's a seagrass bed around is if you look around the tide line on a beach, the strand line, you can find little bits of seagrass washed up after storms, which obviously has come from quite close by. So I know sort of the North Coast beach where I grew up, there must be seagrass somewhere just off there. But obviously I've never seen it. I don't know how big the bed is, where it is. So they grow in those sorts of areas, so really quite shallow. Because they're a flowering plant, they have green leaves, they need to photosynthesize, so they do need water that's shallow enough and clear enough to allow the light through, and sediment, sort of loose muddy sediment or that sort of thing, which allows them to feed and grow.
So I know that we're going to try something out now, because I know you've got a few pictures, and we're going to share screen so that people can actually see some pictures of seagrass, and also a couple of organisms that actually rely on them. So do you want to just sort of share your screen and let's have a look at a few of those pictures?
Brilliant. Before I do, I should just say, so you mentioned my book. Here it is in its beautiful new cover. I talk about seagrasses in my book in the chapter that's about pipefish, and I should be able to show you some of the animals that live on the seagrass in a second. They are particularly known for pipefish and their relatives, the seagrass beds. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen now. So hopefully you can now see a beautiful picture of some seagrass.
We certainly can.
Hooray!
So it does look, I mean, it looks, you know, for all intents and purposes, just like grass. You know, it's long and it's thin leaved and it's green. You know, So if you could give us a little bit of background as to sort of the types of organisms that actually rely on it, because I did mention it being a really important habitat, and it certainly is, and it's worth sort of mentioning, because, you know, after the video the other day you mentioned pipefish, and certainly, you know, pipefish is something that rely on this. So if you could give us a little bit of background to that would be great.
Sure, and of course, because seagrass does stabilise the sediment that it lives in, it provides a habitat for animals where otherwise those sediments would be constantly moving and things couldn't live within them. So obviously there's things that can live in the sediment, worms and other creatures that might not be there otherwise. It then provides a stable habitat for other animals to attach to. So the seagrass itself is a habitat. Things will live on it and in it. In fact, I can show you a lovely little picture here. This is actually some hydroids growing on some seaweed that's growing among the seagrass. There is a type of hydroid, which is the little white frilly things that are coming off the seaweed there. They're related to anemones. They have stinging cells. They're tiny little things. But there is a species of hydroid that grows on the seagrass that I sometimes see as well, which is only found on seagrass. And there are various other species that also quite like to live on and in seagrass, various types of little mollusk, and the stalked jellyfish also rather likes to live on it. So stalked jellyfish, they're closely related to the jellyfish that we know that swim about in the sea, but these ones, rather like anemones, they live attached to a substrate the whole time. So the stalked jellyfish will normally attach to a seaweed, although there are some that will attach to rocks as well. And this one in the picture, the Calvadosia campanulata, the bell-shaped stalked jellyfish, rather likes seagrass. It attaches to other things too, but it's one of the species that you can often look for and find amongst shallow seagrass. So they're rather lovely as well. They're like jellyfish. They've got little those arms coming out. They have 8 little arms. Each of them has stinging tentacles on the end to feed their prey. They've got a mouth in the middle, and they can bring their little arms in and feed things into their mouths. And the little white spots on that stalked jellyfish are stinging cells. They're clusters of what we call nematocysts, little harpoons that can fire out to stun any prey that come come close enough.
Could this sting a human? And if so, how bad would it be?
Yes and no. They can sting you. Those little nematocyst cells they're not choosy. Anything that brushes against them will trigger the reaction, send out a little barbed harpoon into whatever's just brushed against it. Having said that, though, they eat tiny little things. They'll eat tiny little amphipods, like little sandhoppers and things like that, and things in the plankton that we can barely even see. So they're not very strong. They're not designed to take down great big fish or anything. So those nematocysts, those little barbs, are not really strong enough to go through human skin.
Right.
So they wouldn't particularly probably cause you any problem. The only thing I would say with anybody touching any anemones or their relatives, like the stalk jellyfish, make sure that you wash your hands really well after you've touched them, because if you touch your eye, obviously the membrane on the eye is so much thinner than your skin on your hands, and you could touch an anemone or a stalk jellyfish possibly, then touch your eye and have a reaction.
Oh, right.
But they're not like the jellyfish that swim about, that have, some of those have very powerful stings because they live by stunning fish and larger prey that they need a good sting for. Right.
Okay, and then the next picture, I believe, is something that we talked about in the last video, which is a pipefish.
Yeah, this one's rather lovely. I found this down at the edge of one of the seagrass beds that I can sometimes visit on the very lowest tides. And this pipefish is called a snake pipefish. This one was fairly small. They can get quite a bit bigger than that one. So they can certainly be easily the length of your forearm, if not the length of your arm, depending on how long your arms are. And the snake pipefish have this beautiful long trumpet mouth, these great long snout to it, lovely orange eyes, and those vertical pale bands down the side of the fish's flank are the best way to tell that species apart from the other pipefish that we have. So we have quite a few different species of pipefish, and most of them actually are associated with seagrass, or it's sometimes called eelgrass. You might hear beds, and they don't only live there, but it's a great spot for them. Obviously, with those vertical markings down its side, this pipefish in particular is really well camouflaged amongst what's effectively a grass bed when it's underwater.
They're incredible species. Right, so if you could come back to us now, that would be good.
I'll attempt that.
I'm sure you'll. There you go, you're back.
Okay.
Right, so thanks for that. I think it's really important that people are aware, that there is this hidden gem, basically, that, it's as important as any woodland, as any sort of pond that you might dig in your back garden. It's really important, and it has a diversity of habitats that rely on it. So what I want to move on to now, finally, I'm excited about this. I like these.
Build up to them.
Yeah, too right. Yeah, I mean, it's only been a week in the making, but sea squirts. So yeah. I think what we need to do is just set the scene. So I think what we'll do is, in a second, we'll ask you to share screen again, yeah. And just walk us through a few of the sea squirt pictures that you've taken, which, by the way, these pictures are amazing. So thanks for sharing them. Share a few pictures of them. Give us a little bit of background about them, and then we'll talk a little bit about, because I know that, when people sort of hear about invasive species, and the first one that always springs to mind with people is the grey squirrel. But I know that there's also a threat from some invasive species of sea squirt. Not that I want to diss sea squirts, because they can't do any wrong in my eyes. So if you give a little bit of an introduction on that, and then what we'll do when you come back, we'll talk a little bit about where they sit in the tree of life, because that astounds me. Okay, so I'll let you share screen again and just walk us through a few pictures.
Great. So sea squirts, Alan, they are fabulous and bizarre things. Sea squirts, on the face of it, very, very simple organisms. they often look like a little sack that has one hole going in and one hole going out. So one on one side they draw water in, they filter their food out of the water, just normally plankton, tiny things. They've got little hairs, bring the water in, and a sticky sort of net that traps anything that might be edible. And then they've got a hole to push the water and any waste out again. So they're really quite simple things. But so the cat started meowing now.
That's fine.
But it's very excited about sea squirts. So the sea squirts take different forms though. Although they're basically a sac, you get these beautiful Staricidian sea squirts like this one. So these sea squirts form a great big mat of sort of this whole picture on here is of Staricidians. And the way the Staricidian works, they look like these little flowers, as you can see on the screen, little stars or flowers. And you'll see around the edge of the flower, there are lots of little petals. And at the end of each petal, there's a black hole, so to speak. And that's the hole that the sea squirt will draw water in through. But these little sea squirts you see, they've only got one hole at their end. What they do is that centre of the flower is a shared hole. So they all push water back out of there. They draw water in and then they share their waste pipe, if you like, in the middle.
If I get that right then, around the outside, it looks a little bit like a daisy. So around the outside, you've got these black things on sort of what, if it was a daisy, would be the yellow sort of petals.
Yeah.
And then it all goes to a central hole. Yeah. So each one of those different petal looking type things, is that each one is a different sea squirt, or does that whole thing make up one?
Yeah, so this is a colonial sea squirt. So each of those petals is a separate animal.
Right.
But they all work together and form these flowers, if you like, together that work almost as though they were one animal. So they form a little colony, and they can split themselves to make new petals and new stars over time, which is why you end up with a whole sheet of these Staricidians that are all the same colour, because these Staricidians really vary in colour. They can be orange, pastel blue, dark blue, red, all sorts of different colours, and these ones are yellow. But they can really vary, and sometimes on the same rock you can have several colonies of different colours, but very often you'll see the whole of a rock covered in one colour of Staricidian. Is because they keep splitting themselves off to reproduce.
Right. Okay. And so if you could show us a couple more species, if you've got them. Yeah,
I was just going to show you this blob in the middle. It's so tiny that the resolution wasn't brilliant on this photo, but you'll see you've got these beautiful blue Staricidians around the outside here, and in the middle you've got a blob that's sort of specked with yellow, and that's a little flatworm that feeds on the Staricidians. So I've got a child arriving as well. Excellent. Merci Lou. So we've got this flatworm that feeds on those Staricidians, and as you can probably see, they're beautifully camouflaged. They've got the same colour as the Staricidian, they're little yellow flecks that just look like the material around the edge of those petals. They are almost impossible to see, actually, on the Staricidian. The only way to see them when I'm rock pooling is to get that into water and to watch it, just watch the Staricidian for a few minutes and see if anything seems to move. And they just, because the flatworms blend themselves to the rock, they just seem to sort of pour over the rock, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I've got another species here for you, which is called the light bulb sea squirt. And
see why?
Yeah, it's kind of self-evident, isn't it? And you see this one's got a quite different form. Instead of being a flat sheet on the rock, you've got lots of these little cups, the little sort of sacs that I was talking about. And each of these will have two holes, one in, one out. And because they're transparent, you can pretty much see right through them. You can see all their internal organs. And a sea squirt will have it has a little heart, it has a little breeding sac, it has digestive tubes, and you can sometimes see the little hairs inside that beat to bring the water in. So they're fabulous looking little things. And they're found in the rock pools, you know, probably only about halfway down the beach. You don't need a massively low tide to find these.
Right.
They cluster in sort of dark overhangs or under rocks, and they really are stunning little sea squirts.
And is that around the whole of the coast of the UK, or is that in sort of particular sort of places?
I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, a lot of our marine species do have different distributions. I think that one's found pretty much everywhere, but I might be wrong, because I'm very lucky to live in the far southwest of the country, in Cornwall, and because our waters are that little bit warmer, and we're quite closely connected to Brittany, we do get some species here that aren't found pretty much anywhere else in the UK, and then we do get species here that you wouldn't see in Scotland, say, and vice versa. And without double checking, I couldn't say for sure whether that particular species is found everywhere in the UK. I sort of thought it was anywhere that has a rocky shore, you can probably find it, but right. But certainly sea squirts generally can be found everywhere around the UK, except that obviously they live on rocks. So if you live somewhere that's very muddy or sandy, you may not see quite as many or not as much variety. Then we've got this lovely flatworm here, as we're doing flatworms this morning randomly. This is called the candy stripe flatworm. Not quite sure why. I think it comes from those sort of boiled sweets, those little sort of candies that have stripes down them, humbugs really. It's a humbug flatworm. And this one really likes to feed on those sea squirts that we just saw, the light bulb sea squirts. And so I think one of the things with rock pooling is you discover something, you get really excited, you discover your first light bulb sea squirts, and they're amazing and exciting. And then you discover there's something else that lives on those, and that's exciting and amazing. Then you discover other things that are living with it, around it. So that's, for me, that's always the passion, that you find one thing and that leads to more and more and more, and you never stop learning about what's out there in the rock pools. Yeah,
I mean that I have to say, that is truly incredible organism. It just looks completely unreal, but it is amazing. And you know, to think that that's actually a living, breathing organism that is sort of feeding like we do and sort of swimming around, just incredible. So I think what we'll do is, can you go back just one slide to the light bulb?
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm going to ask you to stop sharing the screen in a second, but before I do, I'm just, everybody that's watching, if you just bear that in your mind. So when we start talking about the tree of life, that is a sea squirt, and we're going to talk about something in a minute that is astounding. So if you want to stop sharing screen for a minute.
Yep.
And then before we actually do go on to the tree of life, I did mention invasive species, which you talk about in your book. Invasive species, I mean, by reading your book, you know, they're coming in either sort of with sort of seafood imports, or they're coming in on the hulls of ships and things like that. Do we know, is this a big problem? You know, what impact are they having on our biodiversity? Yeah, it might be. It might be. I think it's fair to say, increasingly seeing non-native species coming into our waters, which are brought in, largely shipping, bilge water on the hulls of ships, obviously, and potentially in shellfish as well, as those things get moved around and farmed in different places. There are all sorts of things that are bringing new species into our waters. And because the way that marine species breed is through the plankton, things can spread very, very easily. So it's a bit like sort of spores from a fungus in the air. Once they're out in the air, they can travel really quite huge distances and settle anywhere that's suitable. So once you've introduced a new organism into a sea that it wasn't present in before, if it can find suitable habitat with all those little bits of plankton spores effectively going off and settling in different places, it can quite rapidly become a problem if it settles well and if it outcompetes some of our native species. Yeah. So there are a few non-native species of sea squirt that have started appearing and are being monitored through various programs around the country. Things like the carpet sea squirts that
that, a bit like Botrytis that we saw, the star Ascidian that form a covering over rocks, and there are some species of the carpet sea squirt that do just that. They form a thick carpet over rocks, and if those spread, they can start to choke and outcompete all the other species. And if you look at the photos that I showed you, there's all sorts of other species on those rocks. It's not just the sea squirts. You have the seaweeds, you have things called bryozoans, the sea mats, you have sponges, and all these other diverse range of species, which in turn feed other things. So, like I say, you have the light bulb sea squirts, and then you have the candy striped flatworm that feeds on those. Then you have other things that come in and feed on those. So as is the case for ecosystems on land, the marine ecosystem is diverse and very, very delicately balanced. And you bring something else in from outside, and we can have to be quite sure what the impact will be. It depends on so many different factors. Ideally, you just don't introduce new species to start with, because obviously once you start an experiment, you're not sure how to stop it. But all we can do really is monitor. In some cases, you can try and control species, but it's almost impossible to control once an invasive species has arrived, because it's under the water and not very accessible. We don't have many means to control it, and some of the means that you might use to control one species can have an impact on another, just like when you introduce rabbits to Australia, and then you bring in foxes, and then you bring in the lady who swallowed the horse to catch the it becomes a bit like that. And so yeah, it can be a problem, and it's something that needs monitoring. It tends to be the biggest problem around some of our biggest ports, where you have a lot of shipping coming and going, which can bring things in. For now, perhaps less so around some of our less used coasts, but we'll see. Yeah.
Okay, so now then, I asked everybody to keep in their mind the light bulb sea squirt.
Yeah.
So this is the bit about sea squirts that really got me hooked. Tell us about where they fit in the tree of life.
Okay, well, sea squirts, as we've seen, they are little blobby things, and although they're very pretty in their own way, they're not something that we might see as a particularly relatable animal. We're not going to have one in our house as a pet, probably. Well, I might, but most people would not consider them particularly cuddly, interesting animals. They don't seem to do anything at all. And when scientists hundreds of years ago were first trying to classify marine organisms and all the other life on the earth, all the classic Victorian naturalists are out there trying to construct this tree of life, they were looking at sea squirts, and the conclusion that they came to at first was that they must be a type of mollusk, like related to a clamshell. Now, if you've ever kind of seen a cockle or a mussel or any of those sorts of animals underwater, what they have is a pair of tubes that come out, little siphons that come out, and they draw water in and they push water out. Obviously, in those animals, there's a hard shell that opens and closes to allow those siphons to come and go and to protect them. So scientists will look at these and think, well, there's two soft tubes, lets water in, pushes it out, filters out food. It's a kind of mollusk that doesn't have a hard shell around it, as we would expect with clamshells. That was the obvious actual conclusion. It was only later, as microscopes were developed more, and people started to look at the plankton, that we discovered that isn't the case at all. That these little animals, which, as well as splitting themselves often to create new individuals, send out little babies into the plankton. They send out little tiny animals that will swim around and then find somewhere to settle in their adult form. And when scientists looked at these little tiny planktonic sea squirts under a microscope, they discovered that they looked almost identical to tadpoles. And we all know what a tadpole looks like, a little swimmy thing with a tail. It has a little eye, and perhaps most importantly of all, it has a backbone. It has a backbone, as do all amphibians, as do all reptiles, as do mammals, birds, all the sort of animals, as you know, you would expect to go and see at a zoo, generally have a backbone. They're not invertebrates like crabs and other things that have their shell on the outside, and mollusks that have a shell on the outside, and all those. So this little tiny tadpole had what looked like the beginnings of an eye. It had a what we call a notochord, so sort of a prototype backbone in it. And this little tadpole swims around, as tadpoles do, but eventually settles on the seabed and turns into these blobby things with a siphon that goes in and a siphon that goes out. So through that study, it was realised that these aren't mollusks. They're not even invertebrates in the classic sense. They are classified with the vertebrates, so with amphibians, reptiles, birds, and us. So these are our relatives, part of the family. Obviously, you know, they are literally millions of years away from us in terms of evolution, but it's a fascinating thing that these little blobby things that look so much like other blobby things on the shore that we have are actually, due to that classification, really in quite a different evolutionary branch.
Amazing. Now, if anybody is sitting there thinking that wasn't worth waiting for, they are completely off their heads, because
I did my best to make that sound really exciting.
You know what, you did a brilliant job, but you didn't really have to, because it is so interesting. I think, I can't even remember, I'm sure I've seen it on a programme years ago where they were talking about it, but it seemed to sort of pass me by. Then I read it in the book and I just thought, yeah, that is just amazing. You know, that these things that do look like a bit of jelly stuck to a rock are actually vertebrates like us. And that is, nature is just incredible. It's just amazing. It never ever ceases. I mean, as you can see now, you know, I'm in my mid-30s now. Steady. But, you know, to still be astounded by stuff when you're in your mid-30s is amazing. And only nature can do that to you. I don't think there's anything else that can do that to you. That is just stunning.
Yeah, and the other thing, I've just mentioned that a couple of years ago, I found my first ever salp. And I'm not sure I even sort of knew these things really existed. I sort of heard of them somewhere. I hadn't really thought about what their classification was. I found one washed up on the beach where I grew up, and it looked, in a way, a little bit like the light bulb sea squirts do. It's sort of a transparent sac with a hole at either end, and quite sort of leathery, rubbery sort of feeling. But us being us, we picked it up, put it in a jar of seawater, brought it home. It's still sat on our kitchen windowsill, but I'm not sure it's in any state to show you now. But a salp is a swimming sea squirt, which I'd never realised till I sort of tried to look them up. And they have these little hairs, and they use them to beat their way through the ocean, and they just sort of engulf prey, which is bizarre, because I'd always assumed sea squirts just had to be attached to rock and just were sessile, stay there their entire lives. But there's actually these little salps that go swimming about the ocean, engulfing things. And then there's a little amphipod, like a little sandhopper creature, that actually uses these salps as a shelter and goes and lives inside them, parasitizes them really, and goes and lives inside them. So you can find another little animal that lives inside them, which, yeah, you learn new things all the time.
It's mad, isn't it? It's mad. Now, I feel we should go back to your find, even though, I mean, how anything can sort of, you know, upstage the sea squirts, I don't know. I think we're pushing it. But I know that when you told me the other day, really, really interesting. Clearly, you know, it's made an impression on you finding one. So let's have a chat about what it was, and let people make their own mind whether it's better than the sea squirt.
Yeah, I'll hold it up again. You let me know if people at home are able to see this.
Yeah, that's should be perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so this is actually what I call a throat plate from a fish, from a big fish that's native to our waters called the wrasse. This one will be from a Ballan wrasse. And the wrasse, they're fascinating fish. They live by gobbling up mollusks, really, little sea snails and things like that. So they need to be able to grind down shells and break things open. So they have teeth in their jaws that are quite powerful for breaking things. And then this, you can probably see it's a triangular shaped plate. So this fits in the back of their throat. And you can probably see that it's set with lots and lots of little teeth. And those teeth are quite rounded, blunt. They're not like cutting teeth. They're just very, very blunt teeth. And those are used for grinding. So this will work with the teeth in the wrasse's mouth to grind things up. And yeah, it's the first one of these that I've ever found. I've seen them in my books, as you do, and thought, wow, I'd love to find one of these. And so I knew instantly when I saw it what it was. The Ballan wrasse are a beautiful fish. They really get quite large. I don't know in centimeters, maybe, sort of 40-50 centimeters long. They're quite big fish. My son saw his first one a couple of years ago when he first started snorkeling with me, just off the main tourist beach in Loo. We just went round the corner through some rocks. This enormous fish came swimming towards him. And I've never heard anybody squeal so loudly down a snorkel. It was quite impressive. But they're beautiful fish. They have, all of the wrasse tend to have these lovely turquoise markings up their faces, wavy turquoise lines. And often their whole body is beautiful blues, and they have reds and things. They're just lovely fish. And they look quite tropical. They have very pouty lips. If you sort of imagine a tropical reef with one of those sort of angelfish type fish with big pouty lips, they're just like that. They've got a nice pouty mouth. So I do love them. And this time of year, actually, you see quite a lot of young wrasse around. Some of the wrasse species, like the cuckoo wrasse, actually make a little nest on the seabed to lay their eggs in, and the male stays and guards that nest through the season, which is all quite fascinating behaviour as well. And I think I'm right in saying the wrasse are one of the fish species that change sex as well. I think they will start as male and become female as they get larger, but I think it's that way around. My son's just saying David Attenborough says it's the other way around, so it probably is. I'm not a big. I'll go with Dave. I'll go with Dave on this one. Yeah. So yeah, they can. I think they change sex. At least some of the species do, which is quite common in marine life. That things start as one species, even like the common limpet, that starts as male and becomes female. But yeah, I think he's right. It's the other way around in fish. But you get, so they make nests. The male guards the nest. Those beautiful colours. And this time of year, you start to see the babies. And the babies of this fish, the Ballan wrasse, are probably actually at the moment only a little bit larger than this bone is. But they're like seeing little parrots in the rock pool. I think I said this to you the other day. If you've ever seen a really colourful bird like a kingfisher just sort of dart across a river, it's that feeling. You see one of these swim through a rock pool, the colours are so intense that it's just a flash of iridescence. So the little Ballan wrasse are actually bright green in colour, really just incredible, like a sort of emerald green. And when they swim across a pool, it's just the most incredible thing. And I've seen, so the last few months when I was able to get out to the rock pools, seeing some little baby Ballan wrasse and also corkwing wrasse, which are a bit smaller and have really fabulous turquoise over their faces and bodies. So yeah, the wrasse are pretty incredible little things.
And again, you know what I said the other day, it's all around our shores. You know, I mean, rock pooling certainly is something that people should invest some time in. And a lot of people bird watch, and I mean, I moth trap and all sorts. I think going out rock pooling, you know, once all of this is over, it's certainly something I'm going to add to my list. So
yeah, when this is over, you know, I'd say to anyone watching who's interested in rock pooling, obviously read my book, but also join in with an organised event. If you can, look up your local wildlife trust, or if you've got a local marine conservation group, National Trust and organisations like that sometimes do rock pooling around the coastal areas that they manage. Look them up and join in a group event, because when you go out with a group, you've got people there who are, you know, really experienced at looking for things, finding things, can tell you what's there, and you've got lots of pairs of eyes looking as well, and we can bring things together to, you know, I do a lot of these sorts of events. Generally, we bring people together, so anything that anyone finds, everybody gets to see. So you're not just sat there on your own staring into a rock pool, so there's nothing there. You can see so much more, and you learn about how the animals live and how to look after them so that you're not damaging anything in the pools. Excellent.
Right, I'm going to leave it there. I'm definitely going to come back and talk to you again at some stage. I'll find any excuse, but we'll definitely need to talk more. Thank you ever so much again. That was really, really good.
It's been a pleasure, Allan.
And thank you to your fish advisor in the background. And stay safe, and hopefully we'll talk. Good luck with the book. Hopefully we'll talk over the next few weeks again.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Thanks very much. Thanks.